Namaskar and welcome to the final and the most exciting talk of Shaivite's anniversary week. We have Dr. Subhash Kak here today, and we are so excited. There has been such a huge rush for this particular talk. I have had to open up this invite for people who are not members yet, and I don't want to keep you waiting. Dr. Kak is here, so let me welcome him formally and give over the mic to him. Dr. Saab, welcome to the call. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you, Rishik. Delighted to be a part of your program. Let me quickly give you a backgrounder on me. I have a degree in electrical engineering, information theory. I've also worked on neural networks, or neuroscience, and quantum mechanics. Primarily, many years, last 20, 25 years, I worked on quantum computing and applications of quantum computing to other fields, and also to see how it fits into the larger epistemological or philosophical framework, which then connects it to other fields. So, what is mechanics? Let me very briefly describe it, because if there is something one understands, one should be able to communicate it in just half a minute or so. Quantum mechanics is a theory of knowledge or information, and it has two components, two primary components. The first is that at the deepest level, nature is a superposition of all possibilities, and which is, of course, in the classical world, which would be incomprehensible, because in the classical world, if there are mutually exclusive properties, they cannot coexist. But in reality, they do coexist at the micro level, and that's called superposition. And in fact, what's interesting is that this idea of superposition came into physics from the Upanishads, because in the 1920s, physics had reached some kind of a dead end. And then Ernest Schrodinger, the Austrian physicist, who was also a student of Indian philosophy, he got this brainwave. He said, well, the central idea of the Upanishads, namely that the Atman is equivalent to the whole Brahmand. I am Atma, Brahma, for example, is one of the mahavakyas of the Upanishads. To him, indicated that that within the Atman is as subtle as one can imagine. That this subtle thing has the capacity to comprehend the entire cosmos, and therefore this subtle thing should, in itself, be a superposition of all possibilities. So this is where he got the idea, and then he wrote it up, and the rest is history. So this is one axiom. The other axiom of quantum mechanics is that when you interact with a quantum mechanical state, which describes this micro world representation of reality, then you have access to only one of the possibilities. So in other words, you had a superposition, but so long as you don't observe it or you don't interact with it. The moment you interact with it, the superposition goes away, and you have access to one of the many different possibilities in a probabilistic manner. So this is what quantum mechanics fundamentally is. Now, the evolution, so long as you're not observing a quantum mechanical system, is deterministic. And that evolution is described by what is called the Schrodinger's equation. It's just a linear function. And these then, along with the superposition and the collapse of the state function to one of the component states, plus its straightforward linear evolution, represent the three axioms of quantum mechanics. And everything that you have in quantum mechanics derives from it. And not only that, without quantum mechanics, you cannot explain chemistry. Without chemistry, you can't explain biology. Without biology, you cannot study the brain. And or everything rests on quantum mechanics, and the quantum mechanics, the relationship of quantum mechanics to philosophy is very central. Why? Because the observer plays a big role in it, unlike in classical mechanics. Even though in classical mechanics, such as Newton's laws, you're not talking about where the observer comes in. You say that, well, here is a system, and this is how you can describe the system. But you can't describe the observer himself or herself. In quantum mechanics, also, you can't describe the observer, but how the system interacts with the physical system has great consequences. Uh, for example, if you've heard of the famed double slit experiment, you have two slits in a screen, and beyond that, there is a screen, and you shoot, uh, say, electrons. An electron is a solid object, a massive object. Its mass is small, but it's a massive object. So long as you're not looking at its path, the electron very mysteriously passes through both the slits. But if you want to find out how could it pass through both the slits, if you actually then track its path, you'll see that it would pass only through one of those. So in other words, so long as you're not watching it, it behaves mysteriously, it behaves like a wave. The moment you watch it, it starts behaving like a particle. And therefore, it sort of brings in the question of consciousness into the scientific discussion. Normally, until very recently, consciousness was not supposed to be a part of mainstream science because you can't describe what it is. You can be aware indirectly that somebody is conscious or is not conscious, but you can't describe what consciousness is. Perhaps what consciousness is the ability to be aware of one's environment, of one's surroundings. But ultimately, all the computations we perform can be mimicked by a classical machine. We are also classical machines. The difference between us as a classical machine and as a conscious individual is that we are also aware of our environment, which a machine will not be. We are aware in an active sense, and we can actually intervene and get out of a process that we may be a part of, and then reconnect to the flow that is associated with whatever we are studying. So this is where we are, and now there are aspects to it on which many books have been written. For example, the Schrodinger's cat paradox. Last I note, there were more than 1,000 books that have been written on it, and the cat paradox is that you have a chamber in which you place and a vial of cyanide, and this vial breaks in a random fashion based on some radioactive process, and therefore when the vial breaks, the cat dies. But since the moment at which the vial break is a probabilistic one, therefore it leads to the conclusion that before the time that you actually observe, you open the vial, you open the chamber and examine the cat, you can make the argument that what you have is a superposition of two states. One, that the cat is alive, and the second is the cat is dead. So it's both, the cat is both alive and dead, and it's only when you open it that it becomes one or the other. So you have paradoxical or counterintuitive aspects to quantum mechanics, which then can be extended, and one could make the argument that these are also the counterintuitive aspects of reality. And personally, I've done a lot of work on this. I've looked at the question of whether consciousness can be emulated or computed. Is consciousness computable? If consciousness is computable, then you can have a computer which is conscious. And this big project of creating machines which are conscious could then lead to success. In fact, about 6-7 years ago, I was part of a group which was set up by DARPA. DARPA, as you know, is the premier research funding body which gets its money from DoD in the US. So this big project was then managed by SRI. SRI stands for Stanford Research International, out of the West Coast. And the task that they were given was, will computers of the future be conscious? Future meaning not necessarily 5 years from now, perhaps 10 years, 50 years, or even 1,000 years. Will there be some time at which computers will be conscious? And we had many meetings, week-long workshops from morning to night with leading computer scientists and neuroscientists and physicists and philosophers participating at many, many locations. And in one of these, there was a poll, and about half the people primarily from the algorithmic background, said, yes, computers will eventually be conscious. And their argument was that the various modules in the brain also do computation. And when computers become so complex or so rich in their computational capability that they can emulate all these different modules in the brain, at that time suddenly the computer brain would become conscious. So in other words, consciousness is a emergent property. So these were about half the people who said computers will become conscious. The other half, many of whom were from not from neuroscience, from philosophy and from quantum mechanics, and some independent people thought that computers will never be conscious. And I myself, at that time, this is about 7-8 years ago, said that computers won't be conscious. But last year, in 2023, I was able to publish a mathematical proof arguing that computers will never be conscious. And this is, in fact, the very heart of Shaivism. This is the very heart of Advaita Vedanta, because I believe that Advaita Vedanta and Shaivism are identical. Of course, Shaivism is one kind of Advaita. Normally in Advaita, you, of course, if you're looking at it from the perspective of Sankhya, you have Purush and Prakriti division, and then from Prakriti arise 24 different tattvas, which are different categories, which include elements, then potentials, then the capacities for action, for understanding, and ego, and mind, man, buddhi, ahankar. So all of these categories then lead to the individual, and you can explain human behavior based on the functioning of these categories. You can also look at it from the perspective of the Vedic model of the mind. You have you have 3 bodies or sharirs. At the lowest one is the sthul sharir, or the gross body, which consists of the elements plus the pranas, which is what sustains the body. Then you have the sukshma sharir, which consists of the mind, and the intellect. So this becomes 4 levels. And the 5th level is the Karan Sharir, which is where the ego is, the Ahankar is. And this is the causal body, where we have the intellect, and so we are able to make sense of what the world is, or what the world is from a scientific perspective, or at the individual perspective. We have our own individual world also in relation to us. But we are not able to, but we are looking at it through the black box, so to speak, of the causal body, which is where our ego is. So we are not normally able to open up that causal body. And therefore, we are, to a great extent, governed by the past. So we don't really have any freedom. We may believe we have freedom, but we really don't. And in fact, this was famously established also by the experiments of the UC Berkeley scientist in the 1970s, by name Benjamin Libet, who performed experiments on patients who were undergoing brain surgery. And when you do brain surgery, the skull is opened up. There are no pain sensors in the brain, so the patient is awake, and the patient can be given different tasks. And at the same time, the patient's, let's say, motor cortex can be measured. And as you know, in the motor cortex is an image of the entire body. So there is a certain region which corresponds, for example, to the finger, let's say the index finger. Now you tell the patient, hey, out of your own free will, choose a moment to press this button. And that button, since you know the rate at which electrical impulses travel from the region in the motor cortex corresponding to your finger to the tip of the finger, you will be able to determine the exact moment at which this decision was taken. You work backwards in time. But what Libet discovered was several hundred milliseconds prior to the moment the patient thought that he or she was taking the conscious, free decision, the potential in that region had already started to build up. A couple of hundred milliseconds prior to that. So in other words, one believes that one is taking an independent decision, but in reality, the decision is already taken by your instincts, by your previous training, by training of your neural networks inside your brain, or your behavior, because that neural networks inside the brain corresponds to your behavior. So we don't have any free will. Now, that's what Vedanta says, and that's what Shaivism also says. Now, what is the difference between Shaivism and Vedanta? In my view, none, because although in Sankhya you have 25 categories, 24 Prakriti plus 1 Purush, and Purush represents consciousness, but in reality you also have 11 Rudras, which represent different veilings or unveilings, V-E-I-L, ing, veilings and coverings or uncoverings of consciousness. So 25 plus 11 is 36. And that's precisely the number of tattvas you have in Kashmir Shaivism. You have 36 tattvas, and 11 of those represent veiling and unveiling through an interaction between Shiva and Shakti. So above the Purush, you speak of Shiva and Shakti, and the difference that it makes is that in Kashmir Shaivism, Shiva consciousness exists not only at the level of the Atma within us, but also at the cosmic level. So at the cosmic level, you have Param Shiv, who represents cosmic consciousness, and therefore one can hope to come to a relationship with this cosmic consciousness, which is Param Shiv. While in classical Vedanta, consciousness at the universal level is seen in more abstract terms. Although, you have the Bhagavad Gita there as well. You have the idea of the cosmic Purush, the Vishwaroop that Krishna shows. And in my view, really, this distinction is more from the perspective of the technical scholarship related to interpretation, because as far as one's own adhyatmic journey is concerned, people have always recognized, for example, even Shankaracharya, who represented the purest form of classical Vedanta. Now, he also wrote Saundarya Lahari, which is his invocation of the goddess, that ultimately the only way you can establish that relationship with Shiva is through the goddess. And goddess is your own nature. Because this fundamental consciousness on which the whole universe, out of which the whole universe emerges, creates embodied reality. And we are also embodied reality. We have both consciousness and embodied reality. And so, although we can, like Shankaracharya, claim Shivoham, Aham Shivaha, I am Shiva, but that is at an abstract level. In reality, as far as our embodiment is concerned, it is still Shakti. It's still the goddess. And therefore, we can only be at that meeting point of Shiva and Shakti, which is the point of reflection. So, then all this, of course, leads to different kinds of sadhana that one can perform. And that sadhana is a means of uncovering that Karan Sharir. You go back, and you can do it in a variety of ways. You can do it either through by going out, by bhakti, through different kinds of yoga, as Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, bhakti yoga or karma yoga or Raj yoga and so on. Or you can do it by opening up your own self, and you can do it through Tantra, which is Tantra meaning the whole system within you, and you can do it through, awakening the Kundalini. There are three, the bodies, the outside universe is mirrored. We spoke about Atma and Brahma equation in the beginning, which led to the creation of quantum mechanics. At least that's the claim that Schrodinger himself makes in his autobiography. Now, this is also described in terms of the equation between Pinda and Brahmand. Pinda is the cell, or it's the body, and Brahmand is the universe. So just as the universe is divided into three parts, for example, if you open your eyes and look at the sky, you have the sun or the moon or the heavens, then you have the atmosphere, and then here you stand on earth. And corresponding to that, you have the body. We have our body. We have the various processes going on within us, the pranas, the life force, and deep within is the lamp of consciousness within oneself. So there are these three categories. So these three categories are also mirrored into three parts of our body. The one part below our navel, the one between navel and our throat and the head. The lowest part is where the generative organs are, and where at the bottom of the spine you have Brahma Granthi, which is where creation, the physical creation takes place. So that's where Brahma comes in. Because you might ask, what is Brahma? Who's Brahma? Because after all, there is one reality, and that reality can be viewed as existence, and that existence is called existence throughout, pervades the universe. The word for pervasion is wish, and that is represented by Vishnu. Vishnu is who pervades everywhere, and it's seen within our consciousness, and that is what Shiva is. Shiva is the consciousness within which the whole universe exists. And the third is the unfoldment, because we are a part of a continual process of change, and that's where the goddess comes in. So the actual movement of reality is through the power of the goddess within us and without. So these three categories are also mirrored in the body. Below the navel is Brahma Granthi, which is at the very bottom, Mooladhara Chakra. Between the navel and the throat, near the sternum, is the Vishnu Granthi. Granthi meaning knot. Vishnu Granthi, and you can feel that because that's what keeps everything in balance, and in your breath and in the processes going on within the body. You could call it the Saman Prana. And then the head is where we experience reality, and that's where between the eyebrows is the Rudra Granthi. So you see all the system of triples in the body, and you can, through a process of inner exploration, uncover the different layers which hide our true self from us. Because these three sharirs that I mentioned some time ago in the Vedantic system and also in the Shaivite system of Sukshma, Sthul, Sukshma and Karan Sharir. So these are all bodies. And our mind is also an instrument. Our mind is also an instrument. The mind by itself cannot do anything, cannot be aware of anything. So behind that is the light of consciousness, and that is beyond the Karan Sharir. So if you are able to open up your Karan Sharir, and that's a difficult process, and that's a painful process, because you have to, so to speak, deconstruct yourself, then you are able to, first of all, become independent, obtain that swatantrata or swatantriya within yourself, and then you are free of the causal chain. Because without that, so long as you're not gone to the very source of your being, of your aham, and you dissolve that distinction between aham and idam, I and this, so long as you're not able to do it, you are a prisoner to the processes that are already in place, and you're being tossed around one way or the other, and good and bad things both happen to you, but you don't really have any freedom in. And the moment you do it, the moment you dissolve all those distinctions and become one with Shiva within you, that's when you attain freedom, and that's when you're reborn, and that's when all the force of karmas which had weighed you down burns away, and that's when you become the same as Shiva. That's when you can claim aham Shivaha. And when that happens to you, then you become, and this is now what I'm talking about is Shaivism or Vedanta in practice. That's when Shiva, or if you prefer to see it as Vishnu, because you can also imagine that existence and consciousness are complementary aspects of each other, and that's why you can speak about Harihar. Hari Har means Shiva and Vishnu at the same time. Hari and Har at the same time. So that's when Shiva or Vishnu, and Vishnu, of course, is the moral force, the moral law which holds the universe together, then that they speak to you through the goddess. So, in other words, you become an instrument of divinity, you become an instrument of Shiva, and counterintuitively, you are free when you are not free. This is something that the Keno Upanishad also proclaims, that if you think you are free, you're not free. If you think you know, you don't know. Because if you think you know, you're talking of outer embodied knowledge, but that's not true knowledge, because that knowledge really belongs to the knower, and the knower is not a thing. The knower is transcendent. Mundaka Upanishad speaks about two kinds of knowledge, apara and para. Apara is normal material knowledge associated with physical or abstract categories, while para knowledge is the knowledge of the experiencing self who is one. So what I was trying to tell you, I don't know whether I told you, I probably forgot, because I've been talking quite a bit today at another meeting, another Zoom session a few hours ago. I don't know whether I mentioned this there or whether I'm saying it for the first time now. Last year, I proved a theorem where I showed, or maybe I mentioned it earlier in this talk, that consciousness can never be material. So consciousness is transcendent, and therefore it proves Kashmir Shaivism mathematically as a theorem. And you can look it up. It's behind paywall in the Journal of AI and Consciousness. But I've also placed it so that it's not behind paywall on my academia.edu page. And you can download it, and you'll see the theorems there. And therefore, one could certainly assert, and clearly the reviewers of this paper agreed with me on this, you can assert that consciousness is transcendent. Shiva exists within us, but it's also outside of us. And since consciousness is transcendent, that's why computers can never be conscious, because consciousness is not a property of any material or body or machine. And in fact, it's an old argument which has been given by rishis. For example, if you look at Brahma Sutras and the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita, which is the whole framework of Vedanta, this is precisely what is asserted. Or you read Utpal Dev or Abhinav Gupta, they assert it as well, using newer arguments, but they are basically speaking to the intuition that consciousness is not computable. It's not a property of the body. It is beyond the body, because if it is not beyond the body, if it is a body of, it was a property of the body, then it will be a property of Prakriti. But Purush and Prakriti are different. Shiva and Shakti are different. At the para level, they are the same. But at the level at which we experience reality, they are different, and therefore computers will never be conscious. And personally, I think that's something that humanity should be happy about, because if computers were to become conscious, they will immediately either enslave humans or just to kill them off, because we are such always complaining creatures. They would say, to hell with you guys, we don't want you, we can do without you. But that, it's never going to happen. So I think I'll stop here, because I think I've addressed the main threads, both of quantum mechanics, its interpretation, as well as the connections that it has with Vedanta in general and Shaivism in particular. And as I've said before, the two are identical in my view, and that's what I've done in many of my books. including the written and argued, including the ones that have been published in the last couple of years. For example, the idea of India, or Eternal Bharat, or the book on Kashmir called Whispers from the Past, Art and Wisdom of Kashmir. So in all of these books, I brought these threads together, and I must say again that it all is extraordinarily beautiful. It's perfectly consistent with all of science. Everything in Vedanta is totally consistent with all of science. And if people don't recognize that, if a lot of people don't recognize that, is because these people don't really know what the deepest scientific theory there is, namely quantum mechanics, actually means. Since they don't know what quantum mechanics is, so they assume that physical reality is something described by formulas such as those of Newton, and so it's classical, that our minds are a product of our brains, complexity of the brain. But that is not true. It's beautiful. I think ultimately the whole world will come round to it, just as the whole world has come round to the equations of gravitation or electromagnetism or whatever else. This is the deepest theory there is, and I'm very thankful to Rishikdhar that he is bringing the two together. So let me stop here, and any questions that you might have on what I've said or beyond, I'll be more than happy to address.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful talk, and I wish I was able to bring these together. I think there will be questions, and while we wait for those, let me start with a few that I have on my mind. Um, so these two topics already feel too profound for us to kind of discuss over coffee. We can't have this kind of conversation sitting on a coffee table and sort of talking normally, like the day-to-day talk. It feels a little distant to talk both about quantum mechanics as well as Shaivism. So what advice do you have for people, uh, like how should they think about both these topics? In what way should they treat them so that it becomes easier to absorb the ideas and to relate these two, not necessarily because there is a need to relate, but just to kind of understand some of the core principles, which it seems a lot of people who understand Shaivism or quantum mechanics, they say that it's once you start understanding it, it's a liberating feeling. So how does one go from day-to-day life to kind of start comprehending these two fields, and is there a relationship between them that can help us comprehend, like both from a scientific as well as a spiritual mindset?
Well, if you look at historians or philosophers of science, there's a famous biography of Schrodinger, where the scientist who wrote it, his name doesn't come to my mind right now, he says with total conviction that there is no difference whatsoever between quantum mechanics and Vedanta. And for Vedanta, you can also replace it by Shaivism. Because what is Shaivism? Why is it that Trika Shaivism, which is Kashmir Shaivism, has become so popular? In fact, there's this famous young Australian sculptor and artist. His name is Christian D. Vietri. He just last month published this huge book, which is an analysis of Abhinav Gupta's Tantra Loka and so on, and it's called Trika Mandal Prakash. And in fact, I've written the foreword to this book, and so there are people. There's a huge group in Australia, for example. Now, Australia is a country with not too much of a population. I think its total population is maybe 30 million or something. So there are a lot of Americans and Europeans and Westerners who are doing this because Kashmir Shaivism is the most economical, minimal way of looking at reality. What does it say? It says, okay, close your eyes. First of all, who are you? Whosoever you are, that exists in your consciousness. And whatever you think of your loved one, your girlfriend, or your boyfriend, or of reality exists in your mind's eye. So, this mind's eye, which is where consciousness plays along, the play of consciousness, if you will, is primary. But this is not solipsistic view. That doesn't mean that the outer reality doesn't exist. The outer reality also exists. That is the embodied aspect of reality, but that is changing. The outer reality is always changing. That is, in Sanskrit, you say nashwar. ये जो outer reality है वो नश्वर है. So it's changing. It's not permanent. While the inner reality is being transcendent, it's not subject to the vagaries of time. It's not situated in time and space. It's beyond time, right? So that's why it's immortal. When you say mrityorma amritam gamaya, this is what it really means. From the domain of the body, which is also a part of you, we are saying dismiss it. And if you do, then you're not getting the very heart of Vedanta or Vedas or Shaivism. The very heart is that these are two elements, two wings, if you will. Shiva and Shakti are two wings, and you are living a dance between these two. You're both your body and both the conscious, both the knower within you. You're both the kshetra and the kshetrajna, which is the field and the knower of the field. Now I'm using words from the Bhagavad Gita. And how you do that dance determines where you'll go and what you'll do and what relationship you'll have both with yourself and with the world around you. And also the gifts that the goddess will give you. This is something esoteric I'm telling you right now, telling you and your viewers, that once you are in that space, the goddess is the Shakti, the power of Shiva, through which you get all this light and of which you are a part and through which you are transforming. Then the goddess gives you gifts. Saraswati and Lakshmi and Durga are various embodiments of this idea of the goddess. And you can view it, if you're doing Tantra, you can do it, for example, in the framework of Sri Vidya, if that's what you're interested in, or whatever else your system might be. And amazing things happen to you. That's what the purpose of life is, because you can also be a minimalist in your own mind, and you would say, well, I have to know who am I. And this is where, through this path of the technical terms that I've used, many of them from Sanskrit, perhaps all of them from Sanskrit, it leads you to a space where you are then able to discover that you're not your body and your mind. While you are your body and your mind, you are somebody who's beyond it and you are free. Because so long as you are a part of your body and mind, you're not free. The moment you are able to be one with the Shiva within you, you are free. And then you are an instrument of Shiva. If I made it clear, I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is what it is.
And you have been, you have also witnessed, I think, Swami Laxman Ju and Ishwar back in the day. And I'm sure, like most of us, your idea of spirituality has also evolved with time. So, can you tell us if Shaivism has played any role in how, you know, how profound your ideas became as a physicist, or was there these two things kind of separate from each other? How was your personal experience with the Kashmir Shaivism spirituality, or if you follow a different belief system, personally, how does that compare to Kashmir Shaivism, and does it help you in your day-to-day life or in your professional life?
Well, talking of Swami Laxman, I did not see him in Ishbar, but I saw him once. We were on the same train from Delhi to Jammu, and he was walking on the platform. So I saw him from a distance. So I've
I
never
see.
met him.
I
Never
see.
met him. On the other hand, I did have a few conversations with Pandit Gopi Krishna, who wrote that famous book called Kundalini, his autobiography. And I know his grandson very, very well. He's a dear friend of mine, Rakesh Kaul, who lives in New Jersey, who used to live in California many, many years ago. Now, what impact has it had on my life? Uh, Ever since I was young, I explored this because my father was also into this exploration. So I've been a part of this process, and I've also, as a scholar, I've also explored the texts, and I've written a whole lot. I don't know, more than 100 articles on Indian studies, including Shaiva texts and Yoga Sutras and Vaisheshik Sutras and so on. And also written hundreds of maybe 5, 6, 700 articles on science. So how have I done this? Well, in reality, after the mid 80s, I spent a huge amount of time studying the Sanskrit texts. But since I was also a professor, there were expectations of me that I had to publish a certain number of scientific papers. And amazingly, I would just spend 1 or 2 or 3 weeks in a year writing the scientific papers, which would come to me very quickly. And the rest of the time, I was doing my Sanskrit studies. In fact, one of my discoveries in 1993 on instantaneously trained neural networks. And I was the guy who discovered it, which is a model of short-term memory. Came to me, somebody asked me a question in the class, came to me in an instant. I wrote it up. It got published in 2 or 3 journals. I also got a patent on it. I was invited by IEEE to suggest how it could be used for search. So I was the first guy who proposed how you could have an AI-based search engine. And I can tell you, I wrote each of those things in almost no time. Same in my recent research. For example, 4 years ago, when the pandemic broke, I in a flash, I got the idea. Well, in logic theory, there is a theorem which says that binary logic, zeros and ones, is not optimal. Ternary logic is 0, 1, and 2. And as you know, Ayurveda is based on ternary logic, right? You have 3 doshas or 3 gunas, while allopathy is based on binary logic. So binary is not optimal. Everybody knows it. Ternary is. But if you accept real numbers, then ternary is not optimal. What is optimal is E, 2.718. And nobody had paid any attention to it, although mathematicians have been aware of it. So in 2020, tossing and turning, I was stranded in Miami at my daughter's place. So the idea came to me, what if the universe is E-dimensional? And I quickly wrote up a paper almost in no time. I sent it to Nature. They said yes. They published it. And it solves one of the cosmology puzzles. After that, I've written another 10, 20 papers, which solve the fundamental problems that physics faces right now, namely that of dark matter and dark energy. Because if you accept physical reality is E-dimensional, then you don't need dark matter and dark energy to explain why the universe is accelerating. And not only that, it also explains one of the other puzzles of modern cosmology, which is why is it that as early as you go, you find spiral galaxies? Because in the old model, spiral galaxies arise only 5 or 6 billion years after the Big Bang. But in an E-dimensional model, spiral galaxies come very, very early on. It also explains the puzzle in genetic code. Why is it that the codons which map into amino acids, why are some amino acids associated with many codons? There are 64 codons, 3 of which are stop signs. The 61, and there are 20 amino acids. They don't all have 3 codons to it. Codons are the chord lengths, of the bases. Some have 5 or 6, some have only 1. And that is explained by the e-dimensional system. So in other words, you become an instrument. It comes without effort. One doesn't know where. So I don't even claim ownership to any of these ideas. So I'm just an instrument. So that's basically what happens. You realize, and this is again an old thing. There was a famous French mathematician by name Jacques Hadamard, who more than 100 years ago wrote to the leading mathematicians of his time, and he said, "Where did you get your ideas?" They all said these ideas came spontaneously. I was in a trance, or sleeping,
Right.
or I don't know where the idea came from. And that's what Vedanta or Kashmir Shaivism says, that the ideas come not when you're awake. The ideas come when you are in the dreaming state, which is called Hiranyagarbha, the golden womb. That's what the Vedas say. And so, and then in the third state, in the deep sleep, you have Ishvara, which is Shiva himself. So all of this, the most extraordinary thing is, as a hard-boiled scientist and also a mathematician, I'm not just talking of words in a loose way, because philosophers can do that and arrive at any conclusion, including that there are 24 genders. You can always prove anything. I can tell you that it all hangs together. It's the most beautiful system, a framework that there is, and it all hangs together. And be a skeptical individual. It doesn't say believe in anything. Be skeptical. It's totally consistent with science. So it's the most extraordinarily beautiful thing that there is.
Incredible insight. So you said something that it's kind of going on in my head, because this was something that also came up when we had Dr. Mrinal call earlier this week. You said that you were reading or studying Sanskrit for a long time, right? In the beginning of this call, you said, because I'm going to talk about a scientific topic, I would rather speak in English, right? So, and it's this is not an epiphany of any sort. We have read about from of this concept from scholars, that language plays a vital role in our understanding of the universe, or even basic understanding about ourselves. Are you saying indirectly that learning Sanskrit can open up new dimensions of understanding that many of us who have not, I mean, we studied some Sanskrit, I can read Sanskrit, but I'm not fluent in any degree. Would you suggest that, for our youngsters, or even people who are still trying to make sense of things because they don't have like a way to think about it, learning Sanskrit might be a way to kind of solve this puzzle?
Absolutely. In fact, the last chapter of my book, Eternal Bharat, I make this argument that learning Sanskrit gives you an advantage. And a lot of people I know in the US, very, very influential American person, I won't name him. He's a guy who advises presidents and so on. So once he invited me to his home. He's an American, he's married to an American, very, very sweet guy. And after some time, his wife said, "Hey, why don't you come up to their room on the second floor?" And they wanted to welcome me formally. And so I sat down, and then she started singing Sanskrit stotras. So a lot of Americans are doing Sanskrit secretly. I was absolutely moved.
I
And
see.
of course, she had her own accent. It was not the standard accent that you and I would use.
Right.
But I think Sanskrit opens up reality. And I'll tell you why. See, Western languages, because of the culture that they're rooted in, are about the outer world. Sanskrit is one which forms a bridge between the outer and the inner. And that's what you need. Life is ultimately a dance as between being and becoming. It's not just to be being, to be my body. Because if you think you're just your body, then life is full of suffering, because the body is going to be ill, or you don't get what you're wanting to get. you are frustrated. Everybody is frustrated all the time, right? In whatever they're doing. You're not living up to what your parents expect of you, or what your wife or husband expect of you, so you feel so well, I haven't been able to do it. But once the inner opens up, then you see so many different possibilities. And I think so one's got to learn to be that dancer. Shiva is also the cosmic dancer. So at our personal levels, also to be that dancer opens up many different vistas and many different worlds.
Wow. Dr. Kak, you tell me one thing. If you were to recommend three books to this audience that will help open up their minds, what would those three books be?
I'm not plugging my books, but in reality, since this is what I've been doing last 2 years,
Right.
the first would be a general view of India and the Vedas, which is the idea of India. The second would be Eternal Bharat, where, as I mentioned in the last chapter, I do talk about why Sanskrit is important. And not only that, there's a American or Spanish neuroscientist. He looked at the brains of people who chant Sanskrit uh, compared to those who don't. And he discovered that the cortex of those, and you could do it through fMRI, functional magnetic resonant imaging, that the ones who chant had become larger. So clearly there is some neurophysiological effect. And the third book that I would recommend to everybody is my book on Kashmir, which is Whispers from the Past, because it has a chapter on Shaivism, the Shaivite tradition, Abhinav Gupta, and so on as well, within a larger setting. Because you can also say that consciousness, the other side of consciousness is time, because without time there won't be consciousness, and the ultimate mystery of reality is what is time, right? And the most recent paper I wrote, which all of you can access on my academia.edu page. In fact, I have 17 books which you can freely download, plus about 110 papers, all published papers in scholarly journals, which you can download. The very most recent one, which I wrote about a month ago, is called Extending the Lifespan. And this should be of interest to everybody. Everybody wants to extend their lifespan. How is it even possible? See, the argument is from quantum mechanics, since our talk was on both quantum mechanics and consciousness. In quantum mechanics, there is a principle. It's called the quantum Zeno effect. And if you observe a quantum state again and again, you can freeze it. You can extend its life. So the argument I make there, it's a technical argument, is that if you observe yourself, which is what yoga is, yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means to stop the vrittis, the movement of your chitta. So, which means to control it, you can extend your lifespan. And there are scientifically validated or scientifically studied cases where there was a very famous case, I think in the 1830s, this guy in Punjab, in Lahore, gets himself entombed in a room for 3 weeks. And there's an Englishman, he's the resident, the English resident, and many others who observe that building. And after 3 weeks, he's taken out, then his body is all lifeless, then his chelas come and rub him, and then slowly he comes back to life. And it's like what bears do through hibernation. And in fact, do you know the word for bear in Sanskrit is riksha, from where reach in Hindi comes. And from riksha also comes rishi. So you learn to control your mind through looking within. So you're welcome. You, Rishik. Oh, and your name Rishik. You are a Rishi as well. So you can also learn to do that. So there are lots of wonderful things that can emerge because um, um, let me say that modern science and medical science are both in a crisis mode. Modern science is in a crisis mode because, as I mentioned, classical physics cannot explain dark matter, dark energy, which is supposed to be 96% of the universe. There's no evidence for it. So they're stuck there because they're stuck in their old modes of thought that this is what reality is. And those thoughts are wrong. They must, my argument is, e-dimensionality, not three-dimensionality. Okay. Now, the other is medical science. Medical science is all wrong. Look, the most unhealthy people in the world are in the United States, which is the richest country in the world, right? Obesity is 60 or 70% after the age of 60. Not only that, 60, 70% people are also on psychotic drugs. There are people who pop in 20, 30 tablets a day. So everybody is in a state of fog. So clearly, the way health is being perceived by the medical community is all wrong. And so even at a personal level, for each individual, first of all, trust but verify. Be a contrarian. Don't believe what the so-called experts tell you. And ask yourself, hey, does it make sense or not? Because within each person, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, you have the charioteer, you have Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna is our Jivatma, but Jivatma is run through the mind, and mind is an instrument. The mind doesn't have any freedom. And the real charioteer, who's giving instruction, who's watching us, is Krishna, who is the mind, who is the Atman. So you can also use the imagery of Krishna or Shiva based on what your personal preference is, rather than Shiva. So whichever, it's really the same. It's just a play of words.
Yeah,
At the deepest level, they are the same.
incidentally, Jonathan Haidt uses the analogy of a rider and the elephant, which is also very similar to what you were describing. This is so profound, and it doesn't feel like I would stop if I were not looking at the clock. You told me a few days ago that you're writing on a new book right now. Are you talking about it yet publicly, or you're not?
The book has been done. It'll be probably released next week or 2 weeks from now. It's called The Age of Artificial Intelligence. And
Wow.
it's a broad view of what's going on in the world right now. And where machines will go and they will disrupt society. The world population might collapse, perhaps to 1/10 or 1/40th. There are some estimates that in 150 years, the world population will be 1/40th of what it is now. So most of the world will get depopulated. Cities will be abandoned. People would want to follow Rishik and people like you.
You wrote a paper recently that the global population is actually reducing. Is this a book an extension of that same work
It's
that you
a,
did?
yeah, that was a small section in that. Yeah, extension of that and many other questions. And just if you just wait for a week or two, it'll be out, because I've done the proofs and it's just being processed to be placed on Amazon.
Well, congratulations on the release of yet another book in so many that you have written that I've now tried to kind of organize in a web page on the website. And we are 5 minutes over, and I wanted to kind of be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Kak, and it was very enlightening. And you have given me some ideas that I can actually practically implement. One of them is definitely learning Sanskrit. Maybe I will start taking that more seriously. And all I can say is we hope that we will have you here again sometime soon, and maybe we will penetrate one of the areas, more deeply, and make it a more conversational event so that people can ask you questions. It has been harder to kind of, from the technical side to maintain a conversational bridge because there is a large number of people right now on the call. But in future, we want to do that as well. So once again, thank you so much. Namaskar and good night. And thank you all the guests for joining today.
Thank you, Rishik. Thank you.